All right, welcome everybody to the theme panel. We have talked a lot about what we can do in our communities to deal with climate justice and food security. We've talked about governments, particularly the United States government and the Canadian government, since that's where most of us are from in this room. But there's really only one place where global problems can be solved, and that is at the United Nations. And that is why you have an office, why we are here at the United Nations to work together to solve global problems of climate justice, food security, migration, world peace, and so many other issues. Today we have an absolutely fantastic panel, and most of you, I hope, already know that we are in partnership in this spring seminar with the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation. And the Buddhist Tzu Chi representative to the United Nations is the incredible Steve Chiu. And the Buddhist Tzu Chi Foundation took a look at us several years ago, and they saw our ethical eating resolution of 2011. And they decided we were maybe somebody they would like to partner with. And they've been partnering with us since the climate summit in Paris of 2015. And they actually promote our ethical eating resolution better than we do. We need to follow them in really promoting our own ethical eating resolution because it's very important. Our other speakers are Hawa Diallo, who is the chief of the Civil Society Unit, the United Nations Department of Global Communications. She's the best friend of every NGO at the United Nations. She helps us all. She helps us get things done. And what she really specializes in, and you really need to follow the work that she's doing at the United Nations, is youth engagement and youth programming. And she'll tell us more about that work because we need youth to be very much involved in this justice cause that we're in. Charles McNeill is the Senior Advisor for Forests and Climate at the United Nations Environmental Program. And people who worked with me on the planning committee know how much I have stressed forests. And I know that Charles will also let us know that without active forests and without the earth being covered by natural forests, to a greater degree than we have now, we really don't have a chance of getting rid of the carbon in the air. Carolyn Wimberly is a senior campaign manager for 50 by 40, a Food and Climate Alliance. She will give us a perspective of civil society. Tharp has been a partner with us for many years. She is absolutely the most fantastic person in the UU universe. She knows everything there is to know about climate justice and food security. She's the program director of the Unitarian Universalist Ministry for Earth. Welcome all of our speakers, especially our moderator, Steve Chiu. Take it away, Steve.
Thanks so much, Bruce, and welcome everyone to our theme panel, Ensure Food Security in a World of Changing Climate. We find ourselves in a very interesting backdrop with the pandemic having ravaged a lot of the progress that we've seen within trying to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and this triple planetary crisis we find ourselves in, thanks to the climate crisis, our biodiversity loss, and the pollution of land, air, and water. And at the heart of all of this are our food systems. And so we, as people of faith and spiritual beliefs, we're called upon to really investigate how our values and ethics translate into how we interact with the natural world, particularly in one of the most personal, cultural, and direct ways of experiencing food. So today, like Bruce has said, we're super excited to have a panel of good friends and partners and colleagues to come together and reflect on what the United Nations and civil society is doing to ensure that we don't backslide and marginalize vulnerable communities, and really work to ensure that the conversation around food is one that is equitable and sustainable and pushes us towards that framework of ethical eating. That being said, I know that everyone on this call has different perspectives and unique experiences, and we're really excited to be in conversation with you. And so throughout this panel, as you hear perspectives, please feel free to write up some questions. The chat is currently disabled so that we can all focus on listening to our speakers, but once Q&A begins, we'll open up the chat and feel free to pour your wealth of experience and knowledge to share with us as well. This is a journey, and we're excited and super grateful that you are all with us on this journey of understanding and discovery. With that, I'll quickly just introduce the format that we're going to be taking, and then we'll launch straight into our panel itself. So if you imagine this as a 3-course meal, we're going to have 3 large questions that we're going to be asking our panelists. So the first is really around informing ourselves and obtaining insight as to what is happening in the world right now. What are the initiatives that are taking place at a global arena, and how are we really addressing the emergent problems that have really come forth before the pandemic and exacerbated by the pandemic. Following that, as our appetizers, we'll kind of move on to our salad, right? Which is to empower ourselves and look within. So recognizing that our world has all of these challenging problems, how can we ourselves take individual action to really live in alignment with what our faith and spiritual traditions teach us around safeguarding and living in coexistence with our planet, and then also empower ourselves to really be able to do more than just our individual actions and go to our 3rd course, which is our main course of activating and taking action. So a lot of us may have experience in the climate movement and do a lot of work already. And what we find always is there's only so much we can do as individuals, right? There's that threshold of action that you're like, oh, okay, I've done everything I can as a person. But then that's when we transition to the 3rd part, right? Which is how do we come together as a community? How do we build power? How do we organize, right? So there's going to be some exciting conversation around that. And we're really going to lean on the expertise of all of our panelists to really draw forth that. And then as a surprise 4th course, we'll go to our desserts, which is Q&A. So that being said, if you have any questions, feel free to prep those as we begin to have this conversation, or if you don't want to have them publicly written out, feel free to also write them privately to me and I can read them as they come. So we're going to go ahead and jump into the first question, and I'd love to float this to the panel. How is the United Nations and civil society working to transform our food systems to address social inequalities such as food waste, loss of indigenous lands, human right to food, and unsustainable food production practices? And first, I'll turn to Charles to really glean into his expertise from UNEP and the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative. How do our dietary choices drive deforestation in marginalized indigenous communities around the world? And how is the UN Environmental Program working with faith communities to address this gap? Charles, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. What an honor to be here. And I'm so glad that the Unitarian Universalists and the Buddhist Chiu Foundation have taken on these issues, because from our perspective of the UN, food systems have everything to do with our mission, everything to do with peace, security, poverty eradication, healthy people and healthy environments. So this is a topic that I would love to talk about any day of the week. And the fact that more than 1/3 of the world population is currently either suffering from hunger or overweight confirms that our current food system truly needs some urgent repair. And unhealthy diets cause enormous damage. The impacts on our health are obvious. The impacts on the environment, the water, air, climate, massive greenhouse gas emissions, and it leads to global food insecurity, and it increases the risk of pandemics. So unhealthy diets need to be addressed, the food system needs to be addressed, and we need a more resilient, healthy, climate-friendly food system and diets. And I'm so delighted that we're talking about that. This topic is especially true for countries in the global north, where diets rely excessively on animal-based proteins. The work that's needed, and I hope we'll get to that, governments need to take action, private sector, farmers, consumers, we all need to take action, and we can talk about specifically what they need to do. But the bottom line is, from the UN perspective, is that a shift to a more plant-rich diet and more sustainable agriculture practice is absolutely crucial to achieve our mission, which is the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Climate Agreement. We're not going to get there without the conversation we're having today. Now, with regard to that issue of diet, deforestation, indigenous peoples, the simplest way to understand the connection between dietary choices and deforestation and indigenous peoples is to understand that about 80% of the deforestation in the Amazon is due to cattle for beef. Can you imagine? 80% of that. So this is tragic on so many levels, because we know that indigenous peoples are historically the defenders and best stewards of the planet's rainforest, and that one proven way to protect rainforests is to scale up the granting of legal title to their traditional lands. Tropical deforestation destroys indigenous lives, livelihoods, and culture, as well as driving countless precious species to extinction and undermining the ecological services such as rainfall that sustains our agriculture locally and half a world away. So an obvious consequence of this fact is that we should decrease our consumption of animal products, especially beef, and increase consumption of plants. I think this is a theme that we'll be covering a little bit more today. I also wanted to address the misperception that we need more land to produce more food. It's truly, a lot of recent studies have shown that we actually could feed even the 10 billion people we'll have by 2050 without further degradation, without further deforestation. And the solutions are clear. I think we'll get to them. There has to be more efficient farming, higher crop and livestock productivity. We need to cut down on the staggering 1/3 of food that's lost or wasted between the farm and the fork. And we need to shift our diets away from rampant overconsumption, notably of meat, towards a nutritious mixture of plant foods that are less resource intensive, require less land, and better for our health. And I think maybe I'll stop there and come back to the issue of political will, which is going to be so key to dealing with these issues. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Charles, for that rapid fire breakdown of such a complex problem. I think you're right in that our food systems do need repair, and thinking about how we shift in the global north away from animal-based proteins, it's so timely that we jump over to Caroline to really explore the question of how our consumption patterns of animal products are impacting climate change, and also vice versa, and what 50 by 40 is doing to really work to transform our food systems as a civil society organization.
Hi, Steve. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, good to go. Thank you so much, Steve. Thanks to UA and Buddhist Chief Foundation. So appreciate this opportunity. And all of my fellow panelists, I'm really excited to hear what you have to say and your insight. So 50 by 40, really quickly, is a collective impact organization. And we believe that the massive issue of our food systems, and specifically animal agriculture's role in our food systems, requires a quite large and systematic approach from a bunch of different entry points. So we have organizations, we're an NGO network, and we have organizations that come either from a faith-based tradition or biodiversity protection, social justice, frontline communities, animal welfare, public health, nutrition. We have all these different groups that our North Star, or our Southern Cross, to be Global South and Global North inclusive, is that the equitable reduction of the production and consumption of animal products. That was a lot of words ending in ION, sorry. Overall would be key to, or well, is key to achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, biodiversity targets, XYZ, you know, and infinity other reasons. So our main, what holds us all together is this: how do we work to equitably reduce the production and consumption of animals? And so we're a network, we're pretty young, but we're trying to kind of mobilize this issue broadly because it gets kind of siloed, gets quite siloed into different niches. And so we're trying to bring it to every single stage and really every UN body too. So Convention on Biological Diversity, Framework Convention on Climate Change, obviously Committee on Food Security, et cetera, et cetera. I know there are a million others that I'm less involved with, but that some of our members are more involved with. So we're trying to tackle this sharing resources and insight as a network, and using this concept of collective impact to make change. And the reason we've all coalesced on the issue of animal product consumption and production is because of its outsized role in climate change, mainly, but in addition to a number of other things. It's between the IPCC, the most trusted body of climate scientists, recently in their 2019 report said that food systems overall cause between 21 to 37% of anthropogenic global greenhouse gases, which is a huge percentage. Even if it's 21, like that's a fifth. That's a fifth of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's huge. And an outsized proportion of that is due to animal agriculture. So we see it being very strategic, and I'll talk about a bit later, especially with the piece on equity and social justice and indigenous land and land rights and food security and sovereignty, that this issue is just the key to so many of the issues of our time. Thanks so much, Steve.
Beautiful. Thanks, Caroline. And thanks for raising that notion around whole of society approach, right? That not only is this food system fix something that will tackle climate change, but rather it also requires the whole of society. So jumping to Hawa, recognizing the critical importance of whole of society approach to really addressing these global issues, how is UNDGC engaging with youth to be key change makers in addressing the Sustainable Development Goals, food systems transformation, and why are youth so critical to engage in this moment? Hawa, over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everybody. How's everybody doing? Well, I think the UN system itself has recognized the importance, let me just say, of civil society in general, and all the different segments of civil society, thematically, and also within, across the different ages. So, of course, we recognize the more seasoned and expert colleagues in civil society, but we also understand and see the need to support young people as these change makers, as these people who call us out in a very respectful way, but really put us back on track. And I even speak for myself as a UN staffer, as an individual. We're working with young people. I've left myself open. I don't know how many of us can do that, but my mind is open. My platform is open. Because, many people at the UN realize we cannot do it alone. We don't have the resources, and sometimes we don't know what's happening on the ground. Here it comes in civil society with the local knowledge, local expertise. We talk about faith-based groups. The UN sometimes dares not go where faith leaders may go. We dare not go to spaces where young people are rocking it and making changes. I mean, I have quickly learned that from young people, some of them across this screen, like my guru, Steve, that we have to have a different mindset. It cannot be business as usual. And that when we're talking about engaging young people and empowering them, you better mean business. I said this yesterday, I think on Friday on an event. I know working with young people is not about taking pictures on social media. I know that I need to go deeper. And when you say meaningful, you better spell it out and you better study it. Because it's a happy feeling, there's passion, you're rejuvenated. I myself always say I'm sweet 16, and that's by virtue of the fact of working with young people. But, I better know that sometimes they'll be like, hey, Hawa, what's the UN doing? What are you doing? What is your platform about? Whether it's about food systems, whether it's about gender equality, whether it's about love is love. What does the UN have to say, and what platforms are you giving us? I understand as well as many UN people, it's both traditional media, because I'm coming from a Department of Global Communication perspective, and it's both new media, but for me, it's trusting young people, giving them that space, listening to them, but really listening to what they're saying. And for me, I say it's kicking those doors open at the UN and letting people know, I know the UN is a building out there, but it's either really closer than It's actually in your backyard, and you need to look around, see what's happening there. Don't wait for anybody to come from First Avenue or Geneva or Vienna or Addis Ababa. Get happening. Do something in your school, do something in your neighborhood, and then bring it back to the UN. We'll get into that later. Over to you, Steve.
Beautiful. Thanks, Hawa. Definitely youth and faith leaders have a sort of reach that is super important for the UN to be able to tap into, and that level of engagement is profoundly important. And so thinking about how the UN is in our backyard, let's go into our own very own backyard with Ali to reflect on how, from the UU perspective, do our dietary choices touch the issues of race, class, and human rights, and what are we doing to transform our food systems to become more equitable and just?
Thank you, Steve. Gosh, it's an honor to be on this panel. I want to say thank you to you all. You know, I wanted to share a little personal history that I was a big Model United Nations nerd in college, and I bought the physical copy of UN reports in college about this is the 2009 Livestock's Long Shadow and vital forest graphics and food insecurity reports of the world, you know, so I was that college nerd going to the UN to understand what was going on these issues. And I think that so I wanted to say, you know, in this question of how's the UN working to transform these issues, they're providing so much data, so much of a, you know, looking holistically on a global scale at what's going on in a way that, you know, we wouldn't be able to do without some of that support from the UN. And then also the goals, right? Okay, and being able to get to scale, to say on a global scale, we're really trying to work towards these things. So I wanted to lift that up as what I see a big role of the United Nations being in addressing these issues. And I'm also seeing a lot of movement towards nature-based solutions within the conversation, and that being so important. I do feel, and again, speaking personally, I think that a part of this question about loss of Indigenous lands and how we address that issue, I do think that all across the board, civil society and the United Nations, that we have a long way to go in understanding Indigenous foodways, in really recognizing Indigenous wisdom and having them at the table. You know, I was in Paris at the Paris climate talks, and that's where I learned from an Indigenous, I think from Bolivia, an Indigenous person who was there, who said, you know, we don't know what's going on and we don't have a vote, you know, that Indigenous nations, whereas there is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, you really don't see them at the negotiating table in the Framework Convention on Climate Change at the UNEP. So we have a long way to go to really recognize the sovereignty and the wisdom of Indigenous nations at the United Nations. You know, there are ways in which that is being happened, and I don't mean to disrespect and disregard those, but I do believe, you know, it's 500 years, at least in this country, and thousands of years of history of colonization that we're just starting to scratch the surface on reparation for. And that's going to take time. And we know that the systems we're working through are ones who were built through that history. So yeah, I think that those are just some thoughts I wanted to lay down in respect to this question. I do believe that there's so much going on. I'll share a little bit and try to just speak from what I do. So locally, I live in Austin, Texas. I work with a food pantry that's in an elderly, low-income and disabled housing project. And it's next to a public park where we've started growing fruit trees, medicinal plants, edible plants in the park to restore the soil, build up, replenishing the aquifer here, and to create public, free, local, organic food that anyone can come and take in what is a historically Chicano, rapidly gentrifying neighborhood. And so in that, what we're doing is really we're looking at the food system not just as the industrial food system, not just as the, you know, commodities of food, but also food, and this speaks to the UU perspective of it. How can we look at the food system as not just the industrial commodity system of food, but also as our relationship to life itself? You know, it's what sustains us every day. It's a direct relationship that we have to the earth on a regular basis, every single day, you know, and so I want to kind of encourage us to what the food system's not just an industrial global economic and market system, that it's actually a cosmological system, it's an ecological system, and that part of that is shifting how we even think and talk and plan and produce our food on a really deep level. So I see one of the things civil society is doing is moving towards some of those more indigenous ways of understanding that the keynote speaker, Leah Penniman, talked about earlier this morning, just in terms of transforming lawns into gardens or into food forests and really reclaiming our relationship to food as part of our relationship to earth and to life itself.
Beautiful, Ali. Thank you so much for those reflections and lifting up, thinking about how food systems are not just this thing that exists for us to spend money on, but rather is the primal and integral way that we understand our relationship to Mother Earth. So thinking about how we understand and coming back to the I in this equation of our conversation, let's now look within and look at how we can act. So we're now going to take a deep dive into some of the personal actions that individuals can take to help strengthen these movements towards a more equitable food system and respond to the climate crisis, biodiversity loss. In particular, ensuring that as we're taking these actions, we're not just doing them in silo, but ensuring that no one is being left behind. So I'll start with Caroline to look at a just transition. What role do individuals play in a just transition from our exploitative and extractive relationships with our planet to one that is more equitable and sustainable within the food system that we have, and what actions can we really take to move that needle forward?
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve. And what Ali said really resonated with me. And that this is such a wake-up call for a reckoning we have to have, where perhaps our benchmark for success and growth should not be a GDP. Perhaps it should be some sort of wellness or happiness index. Like I believe, was it Bhutan who adopted that? Is there national? Yes. Okay, people are nodding. I just think that's wonderful, and it might seem really hippy dippy trippy to some folks and pie in the sky, but I really think working towards a model like that is key to so many of our current challenges. And as Steve asked, what can we as individuals do in a just transition in food and ag, and then writ large in society? I mean, it definitely starts with individual actions, but I want to say that it's not either or. It's individual actions that feed into institutional change. I'm a big fan of tackling both and not siloing, like, oh, you just focus on yourself and don't, don't try to do something bigger or get large wide policy change. I think both are so important. So I think where we can, if we can lead by example, if we can give our money, vote with our fork, and then vote with our vote, if we have the opportunity to do that, to people that are lifting up, sending resources to those most marginalized, who are giving space, like you is right now, to someone fantabulous like Leah Penniman. There are many, many more Leah Pennemans in the making, and definitely out there. And we have got to lift those women and those people up and give them space and time and resources. So how can I do that? And it's not just like, donate to XYZ. If you're able to do that, of course, please donate to places where you feel passionate about, where you have a personal connection to, or you just feel is a community or a cause that needs to be lifted, or it's lending your own time, or it's those like boring things that we learn, that we hear across I don't know, like in school or just in casual conversation. Get to know your local and representatives, like please vote, get out the vote where you can, if you have the opportunity to do so, which I think most people on this call will. But we need to be voting for things and people that we believe in and that are working towards something better and more equitable. So individual actions. So where's your food coming from? Who's producing it? Can you try to support some local farmers? And it's not just local. Can you be choosing foods that are less impact in general also? can you support more women and BIPOC farmers? There's a very interesting act in the United States right now for that. You could praise hands about and share on social media. It could be your book club. Like, how about getting a book on social justice or food system? Leah Penniman's book. Hey, that could be, conversations wherever what are you plugged into? Maybe you're not a corporate CEO, but maybe you could suggest an activity, a volunteer day that your corporation has to do XYZ. Things like that, wherever you're plugged in, make it part of the narrative. That's what I would suggest.
Beautiful. Thanks, Caroline. And thanks for lifting up the role of privilege in all of this, right? Particularly noting that not everyone has the same capacity for action in the same way, but recognizing that each person has their unique community and their unique ways to contribute to this individual and system transformation. Thinking about bioregionalism as well, coming back to truly understand our community rather than just the community that I've constructed, but truly where do I live and what grows here and what's my relationship to this food. I would like to open a hippy dippy trippy book club, and I invite you all to join me in it. Let me now pass it over to Ali to come within and look at exploring how can we learn from our spiritual and faith traditions to respond to food insecurity and climate racial injustices as individuals, book clubs being one of the ways.
Absolutely. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, I'll try not to repeat anything to keep building on the conversation. I definitely support everything that was just said. I think one of the first things that comes to mind is supporting boycotts and workers and, the people who are trying to survive within an unjust food system. So, I think one of the biggest issues is our highly industrialized, commercial food system creates a lot of cognitive dissonance because we're so separated from how the food is produced, and so it's very easy to get something without really feeling any connection to the full history and carbon footprint and humane footprint of the food that you buy or are given or source in order to feed yourself and your family. And so I think that's one of the benefits of localizing food supplies too. I think that's a really important climate solution. And I wanted to bring the Drawdown Project into the conversation because that's one of the big things that UU Ministry for Earth is working on. And I'll touch on it more when we get into that Take Collective Action in the next conversation. But that's something I definitely would encourage everyone to look at the Drawdown Project. And I believe it's 30% of the solutions when they calculated how could we collectively move towards carbon neutral, that there's food solutions are a huge part of the equation. So I wanted the food choices, looking at the ability to localize as much as you can your food supply, I think is a very important piece of climate resilience. It's just a fact that so much of our food system is deeply reliant on the fossil fuel system as well. So the ways that we can change that are, like I mentioned before, I'm a huge advocate for edible and medicinal landscaping in public parks, in community commons. So I want to encourage people to look at if your faith community has land that you can have community gardens, but even a community garden is a ownership, somewhat commodified model of this is my plot and I get to grow things in my plot, but you can actually just have edible and medicinal landscapes in your city. And that gets into looking at, again, that the food system isn't just a system that is in those kind of structures that we create economically and socially. The other pieces I wanted to mention was education, right? That gets into book clubs, but also in schools. I'll share, for myself, the only thing I learned about growing food was I sprouted one lima bean in kindergarten, and that was it for all of my elementary, middle, high school, and college education. That was the only thing I did in terms of learning about how to grow things. in all of my education. So I think there's so much room, and there's also a huge urgency. You know, when you look at even children's dictionaries, we're losing the words that are nature-based words in the dictionaries that are, you know, for our youth, that there's a collective loss of wisdom that we need to reclaim in understanding biodiversity before it's all gone, and really being part of restoring it and protecting it. So I think education is really huge on an individual, but also on a community scale. And yeah, I think I'll stop there. You know, churches, from the faith perspective, communities, we get to have an impact in the community that we live in. We usually have a land base, and then we usually have potlucks, you know, after a program. So there's also like, how do we, what's our food culture as a community of faith? There's a lot that we can do within that conversation. I've seen UU churches do really awesome things around cooking classes, permaculture landscapes, all kinds of working with local food banks and stuff like that. So I know that there's a lot of us doing really innovative and fundamental work on this. And yeah, it's just a matter of deepening our commitments and continuing to build together to shift and create resilience.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Ali, for raising that notion around cognitive dissonance and how witnessing is such a powerful act. And it's through this witnessing that we're able to understand, educate ourselves, and then in turn begin to have the wisdom to be able to advocate. And thinking about even asking those simple questions around like, what is our food culture within our faith, is such a powerful question that can activate such a transformative process. So now I'll pass it over to Charles to help us explore a little more on the advocating side. How can individuals be allies and advocate to those who are really being impacted by this inequitable food system and the precious ecosystems that it's damaging? How can we really stand for the transformation as individuals, and what actions can we take to strengthen biodiversity at a local level?
Great. Well, I think we all agree and understand that action on climate justice and food security and any other issue we're talking about comes down to political will, and to motivate governments to implement the kinds of laws and regulations, enforcement and finance that we need to address these issues requires a sea change in public opinion and activism. And that's why we in the UN have been attracted to work with the religious communities and faith leaders that we know we need to inspire people in new ways and reach them at a deeper level of values and ethics. And it's why I'm overseeing something called the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, which is part of the Faith for Earth program of UNEP. And we came to this realizing that religious people, you know, some 85% of humankind is affiliated with a religion or another, and the formidable force for positive social and environmental changes is staggering. Religious leaders are all over the world. They're in the most remote places where governments have no impact, where NGOs aren't impacting. And then religious leaders and communities can influence, have to have political power, economic power, moral authority. So based on this, we created the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative, and which is really mobilizing religious communities in 5 countries, starting with Brazil, Colombia, Peru, Indonesia, Democratic Republic of Congo. These 5 countries have 70% of all the world's remaining rainforests. And so in those countries, and I wanted to say the most exciting thing I'm seeing happening is there seems to be the possibility of a reconciliation of 500 years of a difficult, painful relationship between religions and indigenous peoples. In all of these countries, we're seeing a healing, a coming together. And what a powerful force when religious communities, indigenous peoples get together, accept each other, recognize, respect each other's spirituality, and get to work. So that's very, very exciting work. In terms of what to do, I agree with with what the other colleagues have said about the importance of taking personal action, mirroring our values in our life, reducing our consumption and other personal choices. There's also recognizing that economic decisions are moral decisions and political decisions, so we can influence through our funding, through our finance. We have all kinds of ways to do that. Disinvestment, investment, putting pressure from shareholders, also supporting NGOs and organizations that are educational, that are activists, that are charitable. And then a fourth way, political action, standing up, being heard, voting, influencing, sharing information. And with regard to biodiversity, I think we all know we're in the midst of a 6th grade extinction. Erasing countless species from the face of the earth, and that needs to stop. And so to strengthen biodiversity, including in food systems, we need to eat more plants and fewer animals. It's kind of simple. A recent study studying 20,000 terrestrial vertebrate species projected that about 88%, nearly 90% of these species will lose their habitats to agricultural expansion by 2050 if current dietary patterns and agricultural practices don't change. So in order to prevent these losses, we need to change our diets, reduce food waste, and sustainably increase crop yields. Those are the keys. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks, Charles. Thanks for raising such a fantastic story around reconciliation and really the path forward. I think a lot of what we're doing in this panel is to paint the possibilities of what can come forth when we take these actions, and to see this sort of reconciliation between the tensions that have been so tragic over this long shared history to come together in this way of really understanding and respect is such a exciting result, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of that. So I'll pass it now over to Hawa to look at, similarly drawing on your experience within the UN and recognizing that youth are such a critical part of this movement to action. How can we support youth in this work, recognizing that we come from different generations, we all have our unique wisdom, and right now, as movers and shakers, youth face these tremendous challenges. How can we really empower them and create meaningful communities and mentor them through this process of creating the change that we need to see happen in the world?
Thank you so much, Steve. I've heard a lot of good ideas, and I think, I'll really, echo all of them, But I have to warn you, I'm not your typical UN person. I'm one of those people who's always causing trouble to shake it up, bring the UN out of the cocoon and throw it out there, and to really open the space for everybody, but especially young people. I'm passionate about the work that I do at the UN, period. And when it comes to young people, I definitely go overboard. It's 24/7. Ask any of the ones who work with me, no rest for the wicked. Because the struggle is there 24/7, and we always have to be at attention, putting things into action. Now, at the UN, I'm always going in the other direction. I believe in the UN Charter. I've realized that the UN has been in my life since I was like in the 2nd grade without not even really knowing it. But coming to the UN and not really planning to work there. So I really spent the time to really absorb and to really learn about the UN, but I've been fortunate to travel to so many places because of the UN. And I always find myself working with young people, with women in vulnerable, situations. So I really have learned so much, and I have seen the innovation, the energy, the passion of young people around the world. I've seen the digital divide in informal settlements, in slums, in Nairobi, in Uganda, in Senegal, where I worked, and I've seen the passion of young people, and knowing that some of them don't have that access. So one of the things I do, when I tell you that I kick the doors open, I literally kick the doors open and go against the tide at the UN, for those who know me, and really trying to infect the people that I work with. You have to, as I said before, actively listen to young people. I mean, clean the wax out of your ears, listen to people. And you need to be able to build that trust, and then also trust them, and that's the only way really that you start to get that communication, and letting them know that, you're there for them. everywhere I go, I'm running my mouth about young people and how we need to work with them, how we need to work with civil society. What is the value of civil society? Did you hear what I just said in that meeting? I'll say it again. This is the value of working with civil society and coming up with different programs. Like we have now in the civil society unit, a call for action stories. We did one on COVID-19. We did one on climate action. We did the one for gender equality. We're going to do one on racism. The UN is talking about racism in the workplace. Somehow I got on those committees and I'm there also talking about racism, but connecting it to different things like youth empowerment, like food systems, like the right to food, looking at those intersectionalities and, you know, waking all of us up at the UN, but even waking myself up. UN has the responsibility to inspire you, to set the standards, give you the frameworks in things like the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, of putting up frameworks like the UN conference on climate change. Am I saying the full name? But everybody calls it COP26, which will be in Glasgow. Or you better know about the UN food systems coming up in November, because that secretariat or that office that's supporting that food system, they have really done a good job in opening up the space for civil society and young people. There are specific action tracks that these, categories of people we engage with are leading, indigenous persons. So that's something you really need to know about. So, what can we do? But I always ask young people, what are you doing? You need to be accountable. Don't only make us accountable at the UN or governments accountable, which you should do, but put yourself in check. Are you proactive? Are you checking out the UN? Whether it's in your backyard or going online and finding out what is the UN system doing. And I'm talking only from one department, but there are 40 entities, whether they're agencies like UNICEF that we know in America, or the UN Fund for Population Activities, or the Economic Commission, which is in Africa, which is part of the UN kind of main administrative office, that are doing fantastic things with everybody. So, it's kind of like, make sure you know what's happening, get involved. And again, I was saying, don't wait for the UN. I don't know if it's a book club you're going to do. I'm on that book club, Steve. Think of something that you can localize and be global. Bring it to the global level. I'll stop there. Over to you, Steve.
Beautiful. Thanks, Hawa. And thank you for your persistent efforts in pushing against the tide and really ensuring access. I think in terms of how we can support youth within our own congregations, thinking about the space that is available to you and how you can ensure you bring others to that table is one powerful way to ensure that we can get more people and get more voices in on creating the solutions that we need to see at our local community. And definitely also thinking about how we can plug in the UN Food System Summit is a fantastic way to ensure the inclusion of your voice and your expertise in this larger conversation that's happening at the UN. And I'm sure we'll talk a little about that as we go to our main course around taking action and activating for our community actions. So we're now going to transition into how we plug in and thinking about how
Steve, you're muted.
Oh my goodness, was I talking that whole time without oh bless. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. Okay, I got so excited about Hawa's comments. I think I muted myself and then unmuted myself, or like vice versa.
Steve, it was just when you got into what we're going to talk about next, not the whole time. Yeah,
okay,
just the last little piece.
Okay, in that case, we're going to talk about how we take action together and how we plug in to support each other's work. Each one of these panelists are doing fantastic work, and I'd love to take that opportunity to see how we can really support each other. So I'll start with Ali and explore what ongoing campaigns and initiatives are the UU Ministry of Earth doing to work on globally and in relation to sustainable food systems, and how can we amplify it as participants here in this conversation.
Thanks, Steve. So the one I really want to highlight right now is the UU Ministry for Earth. I believe Doris Marlin is in the room. Doris is one of our board members, and she is working with a team of UUs to really, so we have Drawdown Eco Challenge is something that people are doing all over the world, but we have a UU team that's participating in the Drawdown Eco Challenge. And it's a way that we can, you know, go from that individual to collective to track. And there's very many different ways that you can basically get points within the Eco Challenge. So we're trying to look at collectively how much carbon are we preventing from going into the atmosphere by the actions that we're doing as individuals and as a community. And part of that is plant-based diet. So eating vegetarian or vegan is one of the things that we're encouraging you use to scale up. And as part of this sprint that we're doing for the Drawdown Eco Challenge through June. And so I put the link in the chat for everyone where you can learn more about that and join our team. And Doris Marlin would love to answer any questions that you have about it. But that's one of the key ways that I'll mention. And you know, I'd love just to see, I hope every UU on here will join the UU Ministry for Earth in our newsletter, on our Facebook page, on our Instagram. We're also on Twitter, and to just stay connected and really help to build what we're really trying to do is build a collective UU force that's part of the broader interfaith efforts, the work that's happening. I love seeing what's going on with the UU office at the UN and partnership. So it's really so true that it takes all of us. And so all of us UUs as part of all of us people working towards climate justice in the world. And one place that we're also building this, besides those I just mentioned, is a web platform called Createclimatejustice.net. And so it's .net because it's a web network for UUs and our partners to join. And we built it to democratize access to mobilization and communication and resource sharing with one another. So anyone can join this platform. There's an interest tag for food justice on there. The whole platform's really rooted in climate justice work, and food is one of the interest areas. And then there's groups that you can join for conversations and resource sharing. There's a membership directory with hundreds, nearly, I think we're hovering around 1,000 activated UUs who are there to connect and build together. And then you can directly email each other, find one another. So we're building a web-based network to help fortify those communications channels for the very real people-based network that we have in our congregations all over the country. So I wanted to share that. And then the food forest I mentioned in my first talk in the panel is called the Festival Beach Food Forest here in Austin, Texas. And you could find out more information about that on Facebook or at festivalbeach.org. And I'd love to talk to anyone who wants to build a food forest and just share stories and resources about that. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Ali, and for those fantastic resources. And I'm excited to see how this conversation propels us to do more. And similarly, I'll now turn to Hawa to think about how we can really get more involved in the UN. And maybe there's a question that came through, and I was going to save this for question and answer, but perhaps also you can maybe help us reflect on what are the SDGs. Bruce has mentioned SDGs a couple of times. I've said it a couple of times, but we fell victim to the word spaghetti, where we end up saying something without explaining it. So Hawa, if you could also touch on that.
Yeah, it's funny, you know, as we're talking, I'm just sort of, you know, thinking in my head, there's so much that the UN is doing, even as a UN staff member. It's like, Charles, I don't know how you feel. I don't know how to wrap my head around everything, and I want to get my hands in everything, but, you know, you do need to focus and have some type of framework. And, you know, the UN does this very well. You know, you need to think about the UN as that convening power, bringing people together from all around the world in terms of governments, but also in terms like people like me, staff members. I'm originally from Sierra Leone, but I'm very much a New Yorker. I'm a, you know, US citizen, but I have that global kind of outlook working at the UN. And in the UN also, somebody said it's that sort of data place, setting standards. Making these frameworks. And that's exactly what the Sustainable Development Goals are. At the UN, we love to talk acronyms, and it's very bad. And we say SDGs. But then they're also called the global goals because they don't belong to the UN, they belong to you. These goals are really like a framework, a blueprint of what the work of the world needs to happen to save us and save this planet, healthy people, healthy planet. It was agreed by the governments in 2000 and it was 2000 and why am I so bad? 15?
Yes, 15.
15. I've been in the UN for 34 years, guys. I started when I was in kindergarten, 2015. But I mean, the member states agreed on it, like all these different goals, and there's 17 of them. My favorite one is SDG 10 on inequalities. People are talking about education, quality education. That's SDG 4. We're talking about food. I mean, there's is it poverty is 1, and I think hunger is 2. But you know, just pop in a website, SDGs or global goals, and the UN didn't come up by this on its own. People around the world gave a lot of input. They really did a good job here, where a bunch of men, I'm sorry, they didn't sit in a room and say, hey, let's get this together, but they went out there in the world, you know. That's right, Caroline, and they asked everybody on a global level, and they had really young people, whether they were walking on a path or you know, riding a bicycle or going online and saying, hey, this is what the world needs to talk about. This is what the world needs to do. Quality education. And then under SDG 4 for quality education, they have like maybe 10 or 15, what do you call those? Is it action tracks, would you call them? Like indicators, like, you know, what action needs to be taken. And then the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, DESA, has done a good job in, like, you know, okay, how do you monitor these and evaluate these tracks? And so that's why I say that the UN belongs to you. You need to take action and do something. Don't wait for your government alone. You need to make your government accountable, but pick an SDG that you want to champion at home, on your dinner table, or at school, or in that book club. Because there is an SDG book club, actually, Steve, and there are lots of like how-to books. For people like me, there's even the lazy guide to implementing the SDGs. For teachers, there's the world's largest lesson. How do you teach about the SDGs or the global goals? If you ever heard about Global Citizen, they do all these fantastic concerts using music and arts to really reach people out, to explain, you know, what the Sustainable Development Goals are. So, I mean, you would need more time to really, you know, get a full explanation. But again, please go online. And I know many people around the screen also even know more than I do. So that's the SDGs. What other part did you want me to talk about, Steve, about just...
Yeah, just how to get more engaged with the UN and the global issues that are being discussed today.
Yeah. Well, you know, like I said, there are over 40 entities that belong to the UN. Do some research, be proactive, and pick a couple of them that you like. And, you know, take a look at 1 or 2 SDGs that you want to champion. In my department, Global Communications, they're really doing a good job in having campaigns. For example, during COVID, they created something called Verified, where all of us are information ambassadors, because there's so much stuff out there in print, on the internet, a lot of misinformation and disinformation. You got to stick to the science and stick to the facts. The UN is also saying that. It's not only, you know, outside. So the Verified campaign is really giving you a lot of information that's factual, but it's actually you to pause. It's happened to me sometimes. I'm online and I see something, I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to punch it out right away. But stop and pause and think about what you're sending out there. There's another beautiful campaign, and you can get involved in that. There's another campaign they just put out through the Secretary General. Secretary General, for those who don't know, he's like the CEO of the UN. He's my big boss. There's a campaign called #OnlyTogether. And it's really only together when we are all sort of like vaccinated, informed, can we do all these things. You know, only together, you know, will we play football together again. My son had a football game today. Or only together, you know, we will go to concerts. So these are campaigns that you can champion also. One that I personally love and that I as a person signed up to, it's called Act Now. And it has to do with your, you know, climate action. Like, what can you do? It's a campaign also. And I went into it, okay, let me see, you know. Don't think just because I'm a UN staff member that, you know, everything is easy. It's challenging. I went into this Act Now. I filled out. I learned a lot about things like consumption, sustainable consumption, you know, about, food system, food waste. And then I picked actions that I wanted to do. You know, one of the actions I picked is that every time I leave a room, I'll turn off the light. You know, easy peasy, but not really. because we take it for granted. We're walking in and out, living room, dining room, but I actually make a conscious effort because I've signed up to ACT now. I will turn off the light when I go, and I'll tell people, hey, don't forget to turn the light on. And everybody's looking at me, but then I'm schooling them through what I have learned through this campaign. And then another one that I've taken is, I love hot showers, is that I have minimized my hot shower taking. And I think about it when I'm in the shower, and you might think it's silly, but if a million of us, took, I don't know, 5 minutes, maybe is that too long? 5-minute hot showers. Imagine what those individual actions can do. And that's basically, what that campaign is about. I mentioned the COP, Steve, and I know I have to tell you guys, you need to understand that UUA and Buritsushi organizations they have your back at the UN. These organizations, these are offices that are on the UN stage. I partner with them a lot, but many others do also. And I know that they take what they get from the UN and bring it back to you. And they bring your voice also on the UN stage. So I want you to rest assured that your concerns, your issues, your focus is something that is at the UN. So that's their job. When they come back to you, then we as individuals need to set ourselves into motion, set ourselves into action. Even if it's speaking to your daughter-in-law or speaking to your friend or at the dinner table, I think you've done enough already. Over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Hawa. Thanks for raising the power we have as individuals to engage with these large systems. I think there's a lot that can be seen in terms of getting lost in the sauce, right? Where everything is so complicated and complex, but very clearly, you're completely right. As long as we have a conscious effort and commitment to want to change and live a life in alignment with our values, we will see that motion and that action appear and emerge that is in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals. So I'll now pass it over to Caroline to explore how 50 by 40 is working to address this work and how we can really support them in this moment and moving forward.
Thanks so much, Steve. Yeah, I'm just so geeking out on everyone's comments. This is like such a great conversation. I wish we were all together, but c'est la vie. Yeah, so when I want to directly follow up on COP, and one initiative that Steve and I are both part of and having a blast doing is this youth-led initiative, even though it's me and I'm involved. I promise it's like mostly young people, called Food at COP. And we're using the food served, the catering at the COP conference as an entry point to this larger discussion on food systems transformation. So we have this, our campaign ask is about the food served at the climate conference, but our larger goal obviously is to have youth perspectives really shared more widely, and elevated to the decision-making table. So that's one concrete thing we're working on. It's been a campaign for over a year, because remember when we thought COP was going to be in November 2020? Wow, that was cute of us, wasn't it? So that's one tangible campaign we're working on. We're on Twitter and Instagram, Food, FOOD, AT, COP, COP. So check that out. And gonna hopefully be pushing out some media and some articles written by the different youth campaign members soon. So that's one thing we're doing, trying to elevate marginalized voices, and especially in youth voices, and especially youth from the Global South. I would say broadly 50 by 40, and also the Food and Climate Alliance that I'm a part of, that Charles and Steve are also a part of, really working to elevate demand side mitigation tools and strategies in climate change discussions. So one example of that, and also related to the food served at COP, is for COP24 in Katowice, Poland. The Food and Climate Alliance put together this wonderful graphic of the food served and how many greenhouse gases were emitted, and how different it could have been if they had really prioritize low GHG foods. And that got a good amount of media attention because it was like a tangible way to show, okay, this food was served and it caused this many greenhouse gas emissions. Wow, like why is a climate conference doing that? So that's one thing. Another thing is we're trying to be engaged in policy change discussions. Now I'm talking about 50 by 40, but a little bit FCA, Food and Climate Alliance, and trying to influence the nationally determined contributions that different countries make that make up the Paris Agreement, or that their declarations are contributing to the Paris Agreement. And those are revised every 5 years. And there's very little tangible things on food and nutrition. There's certainly a large amount about agriculture, but it's really, the focus is really on kind of efficiencies and kind of limiting greenhouse gases on the production side, and really not much else, and not addressing the trends towards these like high emitting foods and how to deal with that or curb that. So working in that space, also working on narrative building. Food systems are super complicated, right? And like saying everyone go plant-based is not globally relevant or applicable. And clearly those of us working on that know this, but it's very easily kind of twisted into being like, oh, these out-of-touch people are telling, Maasai pastoralists to like give up their livelihood. That's not at all. How I look at it is, the more people that are able to have choice and can choose these different dietary patterns will allow for people whose tradition, let's say, is cattle or goat herding. It has trickle effects that using less resources will allow people that rely on these traditional systems to be able to maintain them. Because little do we know that our high emission, we want meat and dairy at every meal, that kind of those kind of dietary patterns, those impact other people's food choices. Those limit the food choices of other people. So I'm hoping we can kind of like transition this COVID mindset of doing things not just for ourselves, but doing things to protect others. I'm hoping that like mindset can kind of transition to like things around climate change and other social issues, that like we might be doing something, it might be a little inconvenient for us, but maybe, it's doing something for someone we can't see, or we don't know about. That's what I'm hoping for. I hope that sort of answered it, Steve.
Beautiful. Thanks, Caroline. And so many gems in there around what it truly means to be a good global citizen and ways that people can really plug in to support your work. So I think you mapped it all, and you're still youth, Caroline. You can't escape me. You're still youth. I'm now going to pass it over to another man who is a youth in my heart, Charles, to explore how moving forward can we, as individuals and faith-based organizations, be involved with the work of UNEP and the various initiatives you have going on.
Great. Well, thank you. What a great, important conversation. And I'm glad that Hawa briefed us on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And I love the food at COP initiatives. There are 4 things that I'm involved in and Hawa mentioned one of them, the UN Food Systems Summit. It's a big deal coming up later in the year. I think November is what Hawa said, and I know the date has been shifting a bit, but this is a chance for this. The Secretary General is bringing the world community really to wake up to the fact around the world that we need to transform the system we have in mind, the food system. And I'm thinking that we're going to need to influence that summit. The kind of ideas that we've talked about today need to be embedded in that summit. So the UN Food Systems Summit is something we should all have our eye on. Also, the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Starting this year for 10 years, it's about preventing, halting, and reversing the degradation of ecosystems worldwide. It's a UNEP FAO initiative. And on the website of both these things, the food summits and the UN Decade, there are ways to get involved. There are ways to kind of get in and advance those agendas. So I wanted to direct people to those agendas. And then I think I mentioned the Faith for Earth program, which is a UNEP program designed to engage with faith-based organizations and partner with them to collectively achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. You can get registered with the UN system, a certification through that program. You can contribute in various ways. And then the Interfaith Rainforest Initiative that I mentioned earlier is really about engaging, mobilizing the faith communities to address the tropical deforestation issue. One key issue connected to food, connected to indigenous people's rights, connected to all these things, but really critical. Without that, we don't solve the climate crisis. So then maybe just to conclude, I would say that this question of how to feed the world fairly and sustainably has never been more urgent. And I think we're concluding, it's certainly clear to me that a plant-based diet is key to this. And as Carolyn said, it's not about lecturing or shaming people into everything. There's an appropriate way to increase plants and decrease animals. And I think my take-home message here is that there's just really no path to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement without a fundamental breakthrough in our dietary patterns, in our food systems. That we're seeing a lot of promising things happening around the world. Consumers and businesses are showing a promising way forward, and it's now up to us to really put the pressure on the decision makers and the governments to take action. We need to redirect subsidies. We need to tax unhealthy foods. We need to invest in education. We need to support sustainable plant-based food innovations, and so on, to avoid a dark future. And we can. And I think my final point would be that young people really need to lead the charge, need to engage their faith communities, need to lead us, that the young people can set the tone and the priorities for the rest of us. And that if we don't deal with this now, we're going to leave a huge, huge problem. Our action or inaction is going to be deadly for the next generation, generation after that. So now is the time to take this action. And there's no more encouraging thing for me than to be with a group of people like you. You called for this event, you've put the issues on the table, you've galvanized action in a really important way. And I couldn't be happier than to be able to be with you and to participate with you. And thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Charles, and super grateful for all of our panelists' fantastic wisdom and expertise in this conversation. This would not have happened without you. We are now closed for our main course, and we're going to move on to our dessert, which is question and answer. And so I'd invite individuals who self-identify as BIPOC to raise their hands in the Zoom function, and we can go ahead and take any questions at this point. And then if we don't see any hands come up, I'll just make note that everyone can raise their hands, but we would prefer to first hear from voices that are less heard. So I'll give it a minute, and while we wait for people who may be interested in asking a question through the mic, we'll also invite everyone to put any questions you may have in the chat. And for those who are raising hands for mic questions, we'll ask you to limit your question to 1 minute, and we'll take 3 or 4 questions this way. So it seems like I don't have any raised hands in particular from BIPOC individuals. So maybe I would just open the floor for anyone and everyone who's interested to ask a question by the mic. And simultaneously, I'll note there have been a couple fantastic questions that have come in through the chat. So while I wait for anyone who may want to raise their hand, you can either like physically turn on your video and raise your hand, or there's a Zoom function where you can click to raise hand. But so the first question, it seems like Caroline, you touched a little bit on it, but there was an individual who did ask, can the UN start serving plant-based foods as a baseline? And I think maybe the question to you could also be, how do we see that happening in the future, right? What is the vision? And maybe talking a little bit about food at COP would be cool. And then there's also a question here, as an educator, I'm looking for current and up-to-date resources for children and youth. Could you guys maybe share some links in the chat that could be relevant? I know Ali had shared some already, but definitely any additional resources. And then there's also a question about how we can work to improve food for non-human beings. So thinking about the animals and their well-being and how we can transform our food systems to also support them better. So instead of just eating one thing over and over again, we can look at that diaspora of food. And I'll go ahead and scan the question box for more questions, but I'll turn it over to Caroline to start us off with questions and answers. And then also note that if any of our panelists have additional questions to each other, this space is also ours to continue the conversation.
Thanks so much, Steve. And thanks also to Steve for putting all of these people together and being such a wonderful human being, and what he's doing in his work and life is just, he's such an inspirational person. I might tear up talking about it. He really is, and keeps a lot of us going and optimistic about our work, which is so needed. As is Baby Yoda, if you can see in my background. So yeah, so can the UN, someone had a wonderful question. Can the UN serve plant-based foods as a baseline? Please elevate that message and idea everywhere you can. I would say that is something that we've talked about as a group, this Food at COP campaign and Food and Climate Alliance and lots of other groups I'm involved with. Like the whole point with the climate conference is, or one of the points of this campaign is that shouldn't the climate conference be like, you know, setting an example for like good climate practices and behavior? So if the UN could do this, I might adjust it to say maybe planet-based diets. That WWF concept could be the go-to for different UN events. Of course, that could be interpreted a million ways, but it being a combination of what's available locally with what has a low greenhouse gas or takes less resources to produce, less land, that might look differently in different places, of course. And one thing that's important to share about food is that we're learning more and more. Most people, when they think of food emissions, they think of how far it traveled, and the transportation percentage of food is like the percentage of a food's emissions related to its transportation is something like 10 to 12%. Like, so a majority of a food's emissions are in the production. So that's interesting to think about. Of course, local has a huge, you know, socioeconomic impact and cultural impact, so that needs to be considered. But certainly it's difficult when we talk about plant-based diets and at least having plant-forward menus at these events, it does get very political. And that's one of the huge problems we're trying to work out, because so many global economies are reliant on the existing industrial food complex and growing soy and corn, taking down forests and growing down soy and corn to feed farm animals. And not only, someone mentioned ocean systems, not only farm animals, a lot of that soy is fed to farmed fish. So fish consumption is intricately tied in with this, and our industrial fishing systems have caused the detriment of so many different coastal livelihoods that have sustainably harvested their oceans and now don't have access to it, or maybe those fish have died out or been swamped up by the huge nets. I mean, I could go on about that. So yes, we are definitely working on a large, we have big ideas and big goals because it's a youth-led campaign. And we're starting with this climate change conference, COP26, but we'd like to do a lot more UN. Yeah, Seaspiracy, lots of opinions on that Seaspiracy documentary, but it started a conversation for sure. So I would say, I don't even remember what the context of the question was. The UN serving plant-based diets kind of generally. Yeah, I would push for that in every way you can. And if the conversation goes into, well, but this indigenous community relies on this food, I would not let that argument get in the way, because it's a distraction, and it may or may not be true, but it's a distraction that a community that makes up 0.0002% of the global population's access to something. It's just, I just think it's a distraction to say that certain groups are used to a certain type of food. I think one has to be culturally aware and also, concerned about planetary health. So I think there's a way to be both things, and that could be planet-based diets, for example. But yeah, I hope that was helpful.
Thanks, Caroline. And maybe also to raise this notion that when it comes to us thinking about a transition towards more climate-friendly diets at the UN as a baseline, there is, I think, a recognition that we're not trying to invalidate or eradicate any one particular culture or community's dietary choices, but rather to look at the sustainability of our consumption practices being unique to that space. Like you had previously mentioned, it's important to honor all food traditions and food culture, but then move forward to adapt to the world that we will pass on to future generations to inherit, to be one to be more sustainable. I know there were some more questions. I'll pass it over to Hawa to reflect a little bit.
You know, I was thinking as I was talking earlier, when you were asking, like, you know, what could people do? Then I'm thinking, what has the UN done, you know, at the headquarters for staff, you know, around this topic? And then I'm thinking that, you know, even the UN itself, and when I say UN, I talk about UN secretariats, because I can't speak for what's happening in Lebanon or in Addis Ababa. But most of the things that come from UN New York, and when I say secretariat, that simply means the offices, the worker bees at the UN. And from the Secretary General, they are applied across the UN system. I mean, the UN, I think, you know, they've turned green, or at least they've talked about turning green, and they've made some efforts towards turning green. I remember when I started the UN as a tour guide, we had utensils. I felt fancy, silverware and plates. You don't find that at the UN anymore. You know, it's recyclable products. That's a big change for the United Nations. It might seem very simple, but that's a big change. Or the fact that they encourage us to, you know, we have single plastic use at the UN. That's a hard one, but they enforce it, you know, and that they encourage us to bring our own utensils, to bring a water bottle. They even give us a bag, you know, to bring our things. So I think there's slow changes, but it's a milestone, even that it's been recognized. Or the other day, we were talking that the UN always celebrates Earth Day by turning off the lights of the UN headquarters. You know, so I think things are happening now. Plant-based food at the UN. I'm thinking, what does that mean, and how can that be introduced? But it's up to you, I think, because when people say the UN, you have to break it down. It means the member states. That means governments that you elect, that you send to the UN. So that's where the push comes from. And when that push comes through the General Assembly, and then the UN Secretariat, you know, puts it into action. So know that you have you have some role over there as well. But I like what somebody said just now, because you know, I'm learning a lot also about plant-based food, because in West Africa we're both. In Sierra Leone, you know, we eat a lot of leaves in Sierra Leone. Everything that is green is edible in Sierra Leone, and when my mom cooks it, it's the best. But we're also, you know, carnivores. But there's some parts of Africa in the Sahel where, you know, meat is only what they rely on. And I keep thinking, how can the UN introduce these concepts in a way? I think, I don't know if it was Steve or Caroline, where you are respecting people's cultures. And I think that's a discussion. And that's something the UN agencies, I mean, Charles would know about that, need also suggestions. And this is where civil society comes in as well. Over.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Hawa. And I'll pass it over to Ali.
Thank you. I just want to acknowledge the conversation going in the chat box, you know, to say that we need to look at equity. We need to look at not everyone, that there is no one diet that will work best for every single person, and that there's deep layers of nuance to these things, and also some concern around, I think, a bit of a reaction to Caroline's word of distracting in the context of advocating for plant-based as a baseline at UN conferences, and respecting Indigenous foodways. So I want to lift up a resource, a movie called Gather, which is about Indigenous foodways. It does include a scene in which an animal is killed, a scene in which an animal is, a salmon is harvested. So disclaimer on content warning, but that's a great film that talks and centers Indigenous foodways that I want to lift up and recommend. And then I do want to say, I believe last time I checked, it was 40 billion animals per year in this industrial, like we're commodifying these lives, treating them with deep disrespect for their sentience and life within the industrial food system. And so I think that there's nuance between industrial animal agriculture, in which these sentient living beings are only seen as a resource. And like I said, like that we start moving beyond food system, meaning an industrialized capitalist market system, to really looking at food systems from that lens of this is actually an ecological and even cosmological system about how we are connected to life and to Earth itself. And that involves many layers and nuance, and that we must practice deep respect and adaptation in doing that. So I just want to share that. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks, Ali. And thanks for once again lifting up the need for just transition. I think when we think about how many people's lives are currently employed by animal agriculture, and despite it being exploitative and extractive relationships, they're still critical to their livelihood. And to think about, as we talk about this dietary change, it's also important to raise that transition, and the empowerment has to be a critical part to that process. I'll pass it over to Charles for any final remarks, and then we'll have to close down the session, unfortunately, due to time.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate the discussion of greening the UN. I personally have been involved in greening UN since 1996. We had a major initiative in 1996. I've been pushing the agenda ever since. And it is the ultimate in a kind of contradiction or disconnect that we in UN meetings would not walk the talk. So to get the right dietary choices for these conference of the parties of the climate, it requires both internal action, Hawa and myself and others. I need to push from inside, and then also from external. And we're making some progress, but it's slower than I would want. And yes, the greening the UN is happening. Outlawing or eliminating all single-use plastics, as Hawa said, has happened in a number. So something I have a huge interest in myself. And with regard to the dietary issue, I totally agree with everyone that I'm not insisting that everyone eat a particular diet. It happens to be true that the more plants we eat, the better it is for our health and better it is for the environment as well. But no one is saying the Messiah should change their lifestyle. And to assert that I'm saying that is a distraction and is mischievous. And so I understand completely what Caroline is saying. Let's not get off topic. Let's just tell the facts, what they are, and then people can make their choices. But I certainly appreciate this forum and this group and each and every one of you for having this discussion and getting the kind of clarity that I'm getting in listening to all of you and participating with you. So thank you so much once again. What an honor and privilege to participate in this important discourse.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Charles. I'll pass it to the other three panelists for any quick final takeaways before we close out. Maybe we'll start with Caroline and then go Ali, Hawa, same order.
Yeah, final thoughts. This has been a wonderful discussion, and thanks for those, challenging us or asking us tough questions. And like I said, this is super complicated. And even, me saying something like a distraction, I'm not like totally clarifying where I'm coming from. And I would hope that we would elevate and support and learn more about indigenous food traditions, because that in itself, like inherently, given the length of time these communities have existed, is sustainable. And the extractive relationship with nature that is big ag, that is the industrial food complex, is the opposite of that and has led to the mass deforestation, loss of species, loss of land, loss of livelihoods. So that is what I'm challenging. That is what I want us to challenge and think about ways that we can move away from that. And go, I don't want to say go back, but elevate and kind of relearn our relationship with the land and what that means, and how we use land, how we choose to use land is so essential to like all the SDGs and climate change and biodiversity and pandemics, as we've seen. All of these things are connected and related, and I have a lot to learn. I know we all have a lot to learn. And yes, so I would just say this has been a wonderful learning space for me. And it's so great to hear what everyone's doing and how we can all work towards more equitable, sustainable food systems. Thank you so much.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Caroline. I'll pass it over to Ali.
Acknowledging the time, I'll just be very brief and say thank you. It's been an honor to be with you all, to have this very rich conversation, and knowing that we all have so much more to learn and so much more to do to transform. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll pass it to Hawa.
Thanks so much, everybody. It's really been awesome being on this platform, always learning, from everyone, from civil society, from young people. I posted the link for the civil society unit of the Department of Global Communications. I say, join me in shaking up the UN. I also posted the World Food Forum, which is a youth-driven initiative under the food systems. It's been a pleasure, really. If you get stuck at the UN, hit me up. Ask Steve for my email. I put the link there. I mean, my passion is to help people understand the UN and to understand that it's more than a building. So please don't hesitate. Get in touch with me through Steve or through Bruce. These are my friends, and they're helping us change the UN and change the world. Over to you, Steve.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Hawa. And thank you all of our panelists. And as friends, to be in this space together, it's been a fantastic 1.5 hours. I'll pass it over to Bruce to close us out. And on my side, just eternally grateful for all of your wisdom.
Sometimes people ask me why I love the UN so much. And if you don't know, you haven't been listening to this panel. A lot of really dedicated people that really want to solve global problems. And it is really the only place where that can be done on a global level. And as Hawa mentioned to you, all of you are welcome. You can attend UN events now. It's easier than ever. You can do it virtually from wherever you are. And I encourage all of you to get involved in this global crusade to save our planet, because we all need to be part of the solution. Thank you very much for joining us.